I was at a pool, and I was standing on the outside of the pool, and I was also inside the pool, looking up, swimming, and I was naked on the inside of the pool. And the outside me was very reluctant to go in, but I was probing with a large metal pole on the inside of the pool, and the water in the pool was very blue and very dark near the bottom. It gradually got darker and darker. And the inside, the submerged me, was very comfortable and was sort of beckoning the outside me to come into the water. But I had a lot of fear of going into the water.
And what did that mean to you?
Well, when I woke up, I thought, well, I could see the archetypal significance of the water being a symbol for my unconscious, and the outside me probing, but without really getting in. And I was comforted by the image of the inside me beckoning the outside me in.
Thank you very much. Welcome back. Well, Joan, what did you hear in this dream?
Well, first thing I heard was you, and how much I appreciated the way you asked him for what he thought the dream meant. Because that's a key to dream work. I have, and you have, I'm sure, a lot of knowledge of the universal meaning of symbols, but those meanings have absolutely no relevance unless they come from the dreamer. The dreamer is really the final authority on the dream. And I can share with you, you know, what the universal meanings are, but without talking to this gentleman, I really can't tell you specifically what the dream means. And furthermore, we stop the process if we try to make too concrete the meaning. The dream process is ongoing. It doesn't stop at the end of that dream. And if we try to tie it down too much, then it can stop the process. Hillman once said, in dreams, elusiveness is their usefulness. I love that.
That's beautiful. So,
just universally, he saw the swimming pool and he had the right idea that water and the unconscious have something to do with each other. But a swimming pool is a very contained area, so it was a contained piece. And frequently when people start looking at their unconscious, they need a contained piece. They don't want to go jumping right into the ocean and going right down to the bottom. So he was in a contained piece. And he was naked, which means he felt very vulnerable, and he did talk about the outside part being scared. And that's really typical when you start looking at your unconscious. You're looking at the unknown. And for reasons good or bad, we have shoved this stuff down into our unconscious. One thing I really love is a quotation from the Gospel according to St. Thomas, which wasn't included in the final rendition of the Bible as part of the Gnostic Gospels.
Do share.
And the way it goes is, if you bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will save you. If you fail to bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will destroy you. So we have this fear of looking at that which, without consciousness, could destroy us. But at least this gentleman was beginning to play with the idea that it was okay to go into a contained part of the unconscious and really explore it and see what was there.
Now, you mentioned that the dreamer themselves is the final authority on the meaning of dreams. But we do have another graphic prepared from, again, a presentation you made on the interpretation of dreams. And I think we'll take a look at that and see what you have to say.
Okay.
First of all, we have that dreams belong to the dreamer.
And that's what I was suggesting, yeah.
Yep. And that another person can add an element of objectivity to understanding a dream. The symbols in one person's dream can be meaningful, resonate in another person. And that kind of reminds me of the opening clip where Kevin Costner's character has the same dream.
Well, and I had a couple ones that had this. They'd wake up in the morning and find that they dreamed the same thing, and this was late in their relationship. So it just showed that over time their unconscious mind had begun to join in some ways. And so, you know, that's perfectly possible. Every morning they would wake up and discuss their dreams with each other.
How about that? Okay, so we've again had illustrated that the dream does belong to the dreamer, but it mentioned the objectivity of hearing about a dream.
Yeah.
Is that your role as a counselor? I mean, you sit in here.
That's what the therapist does.
Okay.
Yes, because obviously if material's coming up from the unconscious, it's in the unconscious because we're reticent to really look at it. Even though it can be perfectly harmless, and as with my hobo dream, expand our life, because we've shoved it down there, we're afraid to bring it up. And therefore, you know, an objective person, an outside person who knows the meaning of the symbols, can ask questions and make comments. And what I do when I ask questions and make comments, I don't try to tell the dreamer what the dream means. How does this sound? Does this feel right to you? What do you think this dream is trying to tell you? Why are you having this dream at this point in time? And I wait for the dreamer then to resonate to that and to decide what that I offer really fits. Okay. And that way I probe to help the person go a little bit deeper into that swimming pool.
Okay, let's take a look at our next graphic with some more tips on how you might do that.
Okay.
In thinking about the symbols, amplify rather than free associate, and I'll have you explain that in a moment.
Okay.
All the characters in the dream are part of the dreamer. The dream will give us clues about what parts of ourselves we are projecting onto others, which we might need to reclaim for ourselves. We've got some interesting thoughts there.
Yeah.
How about the first topic that
amplifying rather than,
it.
yes. Well, if you free associate, you can just go off in 10 different directions. But you try to stay within the energy of what the symbol is. If you're talking about a car, you try to stay with the car rather than go to the car, the road, a trip to Egypt that you took, or, you know, you get really far afield from the car, but you stay with the car and what that really means to you and all the associations you have with the car.
Okay.
So you're amplifying rather than just anything that comes up relative to what the ideas that you associate with the symbol.
So I can hazard a guess then that you mentioned you were Jungian, which Jung followed Freud at some point, and then they separated their work together. But when Freud did his 5,000 word evaluation of his dream, he must have free associated then.
Yes, well, I don't think James Hillman would like that, because
okay.
he said to make too concrete stops the process.
Okay.
And you want that process to go on. It's a lifelong process. We never finish it.
Okay. How can, we mentioned projecting onto other people parts of ourselves we need to reclaim. You mentioned a little bit ago in terms of the archetypes, the masculine, the feminine. Would you care to share more about that?
Well, in that case, the woman, of course, was probably projecting her feminine out onto the world instead of claiming it for herself. And that dream, obviously, she got in touch with what she was really doing to the feminine. Probably she was very judgmental of very feminine women. And I think that it's really important at this point to differentiate between feminine and female and masculine and male, because we all have feminine and masculine characteristics in us, men and women. And both men and women at this point in time need, one of our cultural tasks is to reclaim the feminine. Men will always be more masculine than feminine. Women will always be more feminine than masculine, but we still have to reclaim those lost parts of ourselves. And in both men and women, at this point in time, the feminine often has been shunted aside. And I know feminists get really unhappy with calling one trait feminine and one trait masculine. It's the cultural definition. It isn't that it has to be that way. There may be some biological parts to it too, but there's a lot of culture that determines what's feminine and masculine. And I think the important thing here is that the so-called feminine traits have been devalued. And it may be our very survival on this planet that's dependent on getting some of those values back into our way of being.
Well, I can certainly resonate with that. We have done more than one show looking at women in community and developing the fact that there are parts of, there are strengths to women that are particularly valuable that we really do need to own ourselves.
And those traits are in men too.
Absolutely.
And the big old macho male, you know, can absorb, take back the projection that he's made out on the female of some of those traits, and the world would be a much better place to live in.
Indeed. And one of the things I learned from you when I heard you speak was the idea that one of the ways we can look at our dreams is to examine tasks that might be present. Like in our young man's dream that he shared with us, he mentioned his pole, and his task was that he was kind of fishing around. Can you say more about that?
Well, again, I like to ask questions rather than tell people what they need to do. And I would ask, what were you fishing for?
Okay.
What were you fishing for? And just try doing some visualization, some brainstorming. What do you need to fish for in your life? Okay. And see what comes up for him. I had another client at one point, a man, who dreamed that he was in a forest. And the forest is often the unconscious. And all of a sudden, he was filled with a great deal of fear. And he backed up suddenly out of that forest, and I said, well, where did you land? He said, in the middle of a cement runway. I said, well, why do you think it was cement? And he thought, and I said, well, what are the qualities of cement? He said, it's inflexible. You can't break it up. I said, okay, you were going into the forest, you were getting into some dark, shady areas that were unfamiliar to you and were a little bit scary. What did you do? You went right back for the cement. What does that tell you? What kind of choices does that give you in your life? And so from that, we developed the tasks.
It's very elegant. So from that, he was able to maybe look at some concrete things he could do in his life.
Right. Well, and the concrete, you know, the metaphor is really the most important part of the dream. And I said, well, what parts of your life are inflexible, inconcrete, that perhaps are doing you more harm than good?
Okay.
And so, and of course, again, because it comes from your own unconscious, it's your own material, it has a much more deeper effect on you than if we just talked about it intellectually.
Okay.
It may sound as if we're talking about it intellectually, but the feelings that are going on inside of the individual are much more intense than something that's just coming from the mind.
So if I'm having a series of dreams, particularly negative dreams, is there something special about having nightmares versus ordinary dreams?
Well, there's, of course, many reasons why we have nightmares. If you've been in an automobile accident or if you've been in Vietnam and on the battle line, frequently we'll replay those incidences in our nightmares as a means of working through it. But I think another reason to have nightmares is if there's something the unconscious has been trying to tell you and you haven't been paying any attention, what tends to happen is each successive dream gets more and more intense until finally we have a nightmare. We may have forgotten all the other dreams, which is very typical. It's very easy to forget our dreams. But when we have that nightmare, we don't forget it. And then if we work on that nightmare, frequently it isn't nearly as horrible as it appears. It's just the unconscious's way of trying to get our attention. It's like a child that acts out in school.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
We have about a minute, and I know you mentioned before the show that you have some upcoming breath work seminars.
Right.
You have one in October, November, and December. One of them is for helping professionals, I believe.
For practicing therapists.
Okay.
I want to give them a safe place where they can really let go. Okay. Yes, I am now certified in holotropic breath work. I'm constantly looking for new ways to help people make contact with their unconscious and the many gifts of the unconscious. And I found that breath work is a very wonderful way to do it.
We're going to need to close. I want to thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Okay.
I want to thank you.
Thank
In the
you,
upcoming
Mary.
week, we will look at critical incident debriefing and pet therapy. I'm Mary Crocker Cook. Good night.